That's the that yeah, I feel like I was thinking all right. Thank you everyone for being here. And that's all that conservative come to UCF, kind of get rid of a lot of the liberal nonsense that now, especially as a speaker. Carol Swain is somebody I really enjoyed listening to. I watched all of her interviews and interview stuff, all of her really good speaks within something. And so without further ado, I'll let her take the floor and introduce Carol Swain.
I refuse to let anyone place me in a box. And so it means I have to wear this mask, which I hate. I wear the mask because I don't want a barrier between us. And I want to thank all of you for coming out. And as I understand it, you are the conservatives who are bold. You're not ashamed of your conservatism, and you're willing to pay the price. And the price is sometimes to be marginalized, to be called names, to be bullied, and to be shamed. But the very fact that you're standing strong as conservatives tells me that you have values, you have core values, you know things about yourself, and that you're going to make a major difference in whatever field you go into. And I can also tell you that America needs you at this point in history like never before. And I'm 66, and I've seen a lot, over the course of my life. I've never seen anything like what's taking place now, and just how rapidly our society has changed in a way that I think is very destructive. And I'm not sure what the future holds for America, but I do know that I'm encouraged by the young people that I see in the various conservative groups, high school, and some of them are from liberal progressive families that have contacted me. One young lady contacted me a few months ago. She was in California, LA, and she was writing a paper about the big text censorship of conservatives for a class. And she told me that one of the ways, she became acquainted, I guess, with me was that her teacher told her, whatever you do, don't watch preview videos. And so not only had she watched preview videos, she was standing for conservatism, even though she was in LA. She said, my teacher will probably grade me down this paper, but I'm going to write it anyway. And so that tells me that we're reaching people. And I think just intuitively that people, if they have conscience, they know right from wrong. There's something about people that yearn normal people for liberty and freedom. And I don't think that people just want to roll over. And even among the ranks of liberals, I find it interesting that they call themselves, quote, woke. When you actually look at what they believe and how they're being manipulated and how they're being turned, it's the opposite of being woke. I mean, if woke has meaning, it's you all. It's the people that see what's taking place and you're willing to take the risk. And so that is what encourages me. And when I think about myself, I see myself as a civil rights activist. But if I were to be, if you were to say on Twitter or something, Carol Swain is a civil rights activist, immediately the average person that's a conservative agenda or pushing a racist agenda because white people don't think of themselves as having civil rights. And consequently, they are allowing this moment to take place without pushing back. And what I see taking place is through the critical race theory that's permeated every aspect of society, there is racism against whites like never before. And back in the 80s and 90s, there were white people that complained about reverse discrimination because of affirmative action. And a lot of people laughed about it because they didn't think that white people, well, certainly they had nothing to complain about, but they couldn't be victims of discrimination. What I see taking place today is blatant discrimination because of the color of one's skin, the bullying, the shaming of young people about their ancestors and about themselves. And, every now and then you get a photograph of folks and woke white people. They're down on their knees, graveling, begging for forgiveness for themselves and for their ancestors. And it's even more sickening when it takes place in the church. When these churches are trying to do social justice and they're asking, like, I'm a Southern Baptist. I can count at least 5 times, maybe more, that the Southern Baptists have apologized for being Southern Baptists and their roots and being on the wrong side of history. They have apologized again and again and again and again. I would say that when it comes to racial and ethnic minorities, it's time to extend some of that Christian forgiveness that Jesus talked about. If you're a Christian, that it's time. It can't be just white people apologizing over and over and over for their ancestors and what they may have done. There's a responsibility on the other side to extend forgiveness, but also just the Christian love that Jesus said we should know them by your love. That's how you should be known. And we're not supposed to have the same differences of the world. And the church, when the church engages in the critical race theory and adopts the secular arguments and secular reasoning, and sometimes it manifests itself with the church. Maybe it's a majority white church, they got 3 black members. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a racist church. It might mean that black people don't like their music. Or maybe black people want to be in church a little bit longer than an hour. If you're Southern Baptist, you're usually there an hour. If you're Pentecostal or charismatic, your church service might be 9 minutes, 2 hours, 3, half a day, depending on whether you're in the inner city or where you're going. But I think those are some of the things that account for why churches seem to be segregated. But I find churches allowing 1 or 2 black people to determine that the whole church is racist, the whole church needs to do all this anti-racist work, and the pastors are not standing up, in my opinion, and addressing the fact that there's a responsibility to extend forgiveness, and that Jesus died on the cross, what Christians believe, for past, present, and future sins. And so there's no reason why if a person, has received Christ and they've confessed their sins, they don't have to keep doing it every day, over and over and over again. And they don't have to keep apologizing for the sins of their ancestors. And America would be in a much stronger position if the church was leading on the issue of race, if they were setting an example. And right now they're not. And whether it's with relationships between males and females or between whites and minorities, most of the churches are not leading. And that's part of the problem in America. And so those are things that need to be addressed at some level. And part of what I'm trying to do right now is help educate people about critical race theory and its roots. And one of the books that I'm reading that I'm going to recommend for everyone is by, I think it's Helen Rose and James Lindsay, called Cynical Theories. And it talks about, starts off by talking about postmodernism, which when I was in graduate school in the 1980s, that was all the rage. And it itself came out of critical theory, and critical race theory came out of it. But most people that see all these things taking place in our society have no idea what the roots of it are. And so it's really important to understand that what these authors, far as I know, they're secular humanists, but they're classical liberals. And so they believe in individualism and freedom and democracy and objective truth and science and all of these things that the political left doesn't believe in and postmodernism rejects. They're explaining where it came from, what form it's taken, how dangerous it is, and how to push back. And it's a really, really important book that I would encourage you to read, Cynical Theories. And it looks at race and gender, transgenderism, all those issues where the political left has sort of taken over. And this changing of the language, I mean, that's part of their strategy. Like, how many of you all identify as white? Raise your hand. Probably more than that, but okay. Um, what's, can't remember what I was going to do with that. Okay, what they're doing is changing the meaning of everything. And so when I wrote my book in 2002 on the New White Nationalism in America, its challenge to integration, it was clear what a white nationalist was and what a white supremacist was, and that white supremacists believed that white people were superior to other races and ethnic groups. Now, anyone who identifies as white is a white supremacist just because they happen to be born with white skin. And so the political left has just totally flipped definitions that we once had a shared understanding of. And now they're coming after one that I started using first, and that's unity. They want unity. They want unity, but the unity they want is not how we define unity. Like, it's not equal was uno out of many one. That's not what they want, but they're using the concept. And that's all part of how they change the society and they change people. And when we start responding to them based on their definitions, they have power. You know, you start denying that you're a white supremacist, then they've got you. You're at the point where you're denying that you're a white supremacist, where you're apologizing for your whiteness because you want to be anti-racist, then you kind of lost the battle. And if you think about the critical theory, the way they define, well, they define, they hope the society they argue is structured in a way that white people set it up to maintain white power and privilege. And so whites have a property interest in their whiteness, and that non-whites are victims, they are the oppressed, and that's sort of how they set things up. And the white people, the progressives that are trying to go along with this nonsense, you know, they have to first confess that they're racist, even if they really didn't do anything racist. And there are situations where kids are from biracial families, or situations where a person may be in an interracial race of marriage, and they're still saying that person is racist, so they have to confess that they are racist, that they have, you know, implicit bias. And you think about implicit bias, there's no scientific reason to believe in implicit bias. That's somebody's research. And anyone, you know, that's a researcher or has read research, it's like professors get rewarded for coming up with ideas. And the more bizarre the idea, maybe the greater the reward. And so someone had a scale, or they came up with some kind of way to measure, quote, implicit bias. And then all of a sudden, we find out that babies are biased. That there's some, you know, babies as young as 6 months, that babies are racist. And how do they measure the racism of the baby? They would say that babies tend to prefer people, I guess, that look like them by the time they're 6 months. When you really think about it, I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think that that may be something that's intuitive, that's instinctual, that's related to survival. And you think about how the world is and how, you know, there's a reason why there's that expression, birds of feather flock together. I think that the fact that babies would prefer, by the time they're 6 months, a particular group that they're around, they see that as familiar, that may be self-protection, not racism. But the political left sees racism in everything. And I think they're pushing us in a way that the objective reality that you see. And there have been cases where people were harmed because they made bad decisions. And some of the bad decisions that have happened in the past may involve a woman. She's walking down the street, she looks over her shoulders, there's a man following her. Maybe it's a white woman, maybe it's a person of color following her. She thinks she's unsafe, but she knows that if she crosses the street or if she goes into a store, she thinks, well, that don't mean that I'm racist. And so she doesn't take action, she ends up being a victim. And she denies her the gut because you have a gut reaction. And so people deny that gut. And that's what they're trying to get us to do, is to not follow your instincts, not the reality that are around you, to deny the statistics about crime and all this stuff like that. That's not a way to survive long and protect yourself. But that is the world that we're in. And when it comes to whites who are trying to be anti-racist, not only are they asked to denounce themselves and their ancestors, but they're expected to become consciously anti-racist in a way that they challenge other people. And so they're supposed to challenge racism everywhere they see it, but then everything's racism. According to the political level, everything's racism. But it only runs in one direction. It's only the racism that is seen as coming from white people. And they have argued ever since I can remember when I was a student that people of color cannot be racist because they don't have power. And that didn't make sense back then. It makes less sense now when you have a president that was black conservative attorney, you have black attorney general, you have black people and people of color in power throughout our society. You have black people and people of color leading organizations. So the whole idea that you still argue that only whites can be racist didn't make sense back then. It makes less sense right now. So we are at a moment where I think that the best way to counter critical race theory, and it's everywhere. Today, I learned about it, and tomorrow I'm supposed to be at Watson Friends, 7:45 a.m., talking about the CDC, Center for Disease Control. They have declared racism as like public health issue number one. And just think about all the issues that are affecting Americans, and especially racial and ethnic minorities. And so they see COVID, they see racism, they see, the fact that more black people may have diabetes, and all of these things that may be related to obesity and lack of exercise, all of that's racism. And so now it's they're saying that racism is public health issue number one, but it's not racism, period. Like racism is bad for everybody, for white people, black people, no. They're just in racism against people of color as a national issue. And that's very dangerous when you have government institutions adopting flawed philosophical theories like critical race theory and trying to make policy. And so they're not addressing the problems that are affecting racial and ethnic minorities. And we don't hear much about HIV, AIDS, infections anymore, but black people lead the charts. It's something like, of those that contracted, it's something like 43% of them are black. And you don't see them talking about the lifestyles and how they avoid it. No, they're not talking about that, they're talking about racism. And so that's problematic. So these are the things that I think you can push back against. And one way to push back against it is critical race theory, shaming and bullying people because of the color of their skin that's un-American. That's not something we do in this country. And so that needs to be said. And then it runs counter to the civil rights laws, because when you read the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it protects people, based on race, national origin, sex, and something else. But characteristics like that, race, it means everyone. It doesn't mean just racial and ethnic minorities. It doesn't mean just black people. Civil rights applies to all people. And so you have to, when you see things that run counter to civil rights laws because it's discrimination, you as a white person have the same rights as people who are racial and ethnic minorities. And so you should document when you believe you're being discriminated against. And it's blatant discrimination by someone in a position of authority, and they're saying things against you and your belong to that group, it's not acceptable. They will continue to do it unless you hold them accountable. So you have civil rights, and you need to stand up for your civil rights. And you are protected by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And that's not something that just affects immigrants and people of color, it affects every American. So I think you're on strong ground. The best way for us to push back is to push back based on the fact that there are some things we don't do in America. And it used to be we didn't shame children. And what is happening now with the critical race theory is that it has seeped down into K through 12. And there's some schools, California, Minnesota, Illinois, school systems where they're introducing kids in the first grade to some of the concepts. By the time they get to the ninth grade in high school, they're teaching them about whiteness and that Christianity, is a biased religion. They're teaching them other religions, and they're teaching them that capitalism is evil. All of these ideologies, and when they talk about civic education, what they're trying to do is to turn out people who will vote for a particular political party. And so they're pushing an aggressive agenda on kids that are in school K through 12. And, my advice for parents, if they can do it, is to take their children out of public school, homeschool, send them to a private school or somewhere that you know is safe, because many of the private schools that are Christian even and conservative have been infiltrated by progressives. But the public schools seem to be a lost cause. There has to be people who will fight for the rights of all students. And right now, they are just places where they are indoctrinated. And 10 years ago, it was just the colleges. And I noticed a shift in students. A lot of things happened after President Obama got elected, but I noticed you had more students coming in as freshmen that knew everything in the world. They knew the answer to all the big questions. They had it all worked out because they had been indoctrinated in middle school and high school. And that's a problem. And it's getting worse if you go down to K-12 and you start indoctrination earlier and earlier. So that's how I feel about that. And usually I tell people a little bit about my background. I was one of 12 children, dropped out of school after completing the 8th grade. I married at 16, had my first child at 17. By the time I was 20, I had 3 small children. I got a high school equivalency, went to a community college, got the first of 5 degrees. My first degree is in business. I wanted to do art, but I was told by my counselor to be practical, and so I did business. And then my second degree was in criminal justice, and by that time, I had applied for jobs thinking that I was going to work in a store and be a store manager. That was my dream job. I was told that I needed a 4-year degree, so I went to the college catalog of the 4-year school that was nearest to where I live, which is Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia, Lutheran School. Looked at all the majors, looking for the one that had the least amount of math that would be interesting to me, and I chose criminal justice. And so I got my second degree in criminal justice, and I graduated magna cum laude for working 40 hours a week, nights and weekends at the community college library. And that was a job they created for me. I started as a work study student working 10 hours a week, because the regular employees would call out, and they would have a crisis about who's going to work. And I would always volunteer to work extra. They created a full-time job for me. And so during the time I was at Roanoke College, I was going to school full-time during the day at Roanoke College, and I was working nights and weekends full-time at the community college. It was a perfect job because I could take my children to work when I needed to. No one uses a community college library at night. Very few use it on the weekend. And so during that time, I was not, person of faith. I was always kind of spiritual, but not a person of faith. But when I look back at that, it was such a perfect job for me. And so I got my 4-year degree, graduated magna cum laude, won national prizes, was not involved in the high student union because I was very focused on my grades. I used my time to work or to study or to take care of my children. I didn't have time to play. Graduated with the 4-year degree. By then, be another black government worker. That was my goal. When I got to, graduate school, the professors took an interest in me, and I started working with the professor, on giving conference papers and that type of thing, but I still was not interested in a PhD. And I have been shy all of my life. No way would I be a teacher, because I could never have imagined myself standing in front of a group, and much less turning my back to that group to write on the board. It wasn't gonna happen. But the 1980s, there was a recession. And during that recession, even though I've been an honor student, I was known across the city, I started a scholarship for minorities. There was an academic scholarship at Warner College, at least it was how it was supposed to be set up. That's its own story. It's an endowed scholarship, and I started it because when I entered Warner College, it was a private school, and I was working full time. I was still having to borrow money for tuition and stuff like that, and so I wanted an academic scholarship. I was told, or at least maybe I asked them if I had a certain GPA, would I be able to get one? They said yes. But then every semester when I had it, there was an excuse. And one of the deans said the money that no black has ever contributed money to Ronald College, and some of the money we had was a restriction. And at that point, I decided in my spirit, one day I'm going to start a scholarship at Ronald College for minorities, and then it came to me in the middle of the night time to do it. Anyone from a small town knows that the black mortician is the richest man in town. And when I was at the community college, I had a teacher who was married to the black mortician in town. She died, and so I went to her husband and asked if he was interested in starting a scholarship for minorities at the college. He said he was interested. Then I wrote a proposal, did my research, went to the president of Ronald College and told him that Mr. Cameron was interested in having a scholarship named after his late wife. And the president was interested. He called his development people in, and he said, I like this idea, they can have them. They were furious. They had a capital campaign. They said, we're not gonna raise any money. First month, I think they raised about 100,000. They were, and Mr. Hamlin became Warner College's first black board member, and I became the second black board member. And I was on the board for probably 12, 13 years. First 5 years, I didn't say anything because I was too shy. But that scholarship is still endowed. And a lot of things I've done in life is because someone did me mad. Even running for mayor in Nashville, someone chided me and said, you know, people like Swain like to talk, but you know, when you need them to do something, they all talk. And so my attitude has always been, I'll show that. So I applied for jobs in the 80s. It was recession. I was encouraged to apply to graduate school. I applied to Carolina and Duke. Carolina immediately admitted me and offered me a nice scholarship. I think it was like $13,000 a year. This was back in the 80s. That was a lot of money. And Duke, the graduate director, called me and told me that Duke was a quite boy school, and that I would be much happier at Carolina. And I was furious. And I made them give my money back. And then later they tried to fire me, and I got the satisfaction of everything. So now I'll take your questions in the time that remains. Or comments.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts on college quotas and stuff like that? College quotas? Like you have to let a certain amount of.
Don't you know that quotas are unconstitutional? The Supreme Court says you cannot have racial quotas. You can have goals and content. And so what colleges do is that they have a system where the incoming class always looks the same. In fact, when I was at Princeton, when I was at Vanderbilt, you usually have a 25% minority class. There's 10% black, maybe 6% Hispanic, or maybe it was, the Asians got the smaller man. But it would be 25% minority every year, no matter what like the year was always the same. But quotas themselves are supposed to be unconstitutional. And if you know the history of affirmative action, it was actually the Republicans that came up with quotas and timetables. Nixon's Philadelphia plan. And the Republicans, you know, like they have been really progressive when it came to race and race relations. One other thing, I think it's so interesting how the Democrats are pretending to care about Asians. And hate crimes and all this stuff like that. If you care about Asians, stop discriminating against them when it comes to college admission. You know, that's simple. Do it. Stop doing that. But no, they don't want to address that.
So, I know a lot of us are, unfortunately, a lot of minority communities do are like crime, murder, and this and that. So, how can the government like truly help those communities and people like that to, you know, make circumstances like
Why would you think the government would actually care about helping those people?
or like, you know, or how do we try to help?
I mean, some of us do care. And I think the compassion, a lot of it comes from people of faith, that they really do want to improve people's lives. But for the government itself, if you look at the conditions of racial and ethnic communities, especially African Americans, government intervention has actually worsened the situation. And when you tell black people that everything they do is because of white racism, then their individual decisions, if you say that racism is permanent, like the critical race theorists say that racism is permanent, it's always going to be a part of our society. There's nothing you can do about it. And that's a white supremacist argument because they say that white people have a property interest in their whiteness. And so they would argue that the poorest white person in Appalachia, you know, maybe their parents don't have more than a third grade education, that they have advantages over the richest black person who may be the child of a senator, or they may be the child of a sports player or actor or an actress. It could be a black billionaire. They would argue that all white people are somehow privileged over all minorities. To me, that's a racist argument. And now, again, I don't think that the government is trying to help racial and ethnic minorities. I think that the people that are elites, that they want to underclass. And if they're trying to help, if progressives were really trying to help racial and ethnic minorities, why would they argue that math is racist? And that there are no right answers to math? And that teachers should recognize this, and that they really shouldn't grade or press black students to get the right answers of minority students. And what I think will happen in those schools that adopt this ethno-mathematics that was funded by Bill Gates is that the teachers are not going to put the black kids in one corner and teach them that math is racist, and then the white kids are going to be over here and they're going to get real math. Everybody's going to be taught the same thing. And so where will the engineers come from, the architects, the CPAs, and the pharmacists, anyone that has to understand math, be able to get things, you know, just to balance your checkbook. If they don't write answers to math and they begin to do that, I mean, that's destroying people's lives and opportunities. And last year at Rutgers University, their English department decided that black students did not have to adhere to standard English. And I mean, what will that mean for the people when they actually go out and try to get a job? And I think one of the reasons why you had so much frustration and hatred on campus is that they have lowered the standard so low to get the right quota that they have people there that really can't do the work. And so if you really can't do the work, you can be very frustrated. And I can tell you that myself and my personality, the way I did my education was perfect because I started at a community college. I went to a four-year college, and I gradually went to better and better schools. If I had started somewhere where I was failing, I'm just making ends, I would have dropped out. There's no way I would have been able to take it because I care about, you know, I care about grades and stuff like that. I would have failed. And so if you care, and you're in classes and you have no idea what the teacher's saying, you can't do the work, everywhere, then I think it makes people angry. And that's one reason why we have so many problems that we do.
How optimistic or cynical do you feel about the future of how conservatives, and especially the church, as you said, is currently losing against the culture war and progressive?
There are some churches that are holding the line, but I think that a lot of pastors don't understand the concepts. And you say social justice. We're for social justice. Jesus was for social justice. The church was communist. They divided everything. When you say those things, that a lot of people are not equipped to respond to it, and that education of the church and pastors, that's what's needed. And I would say that's taking place. It is taking place. There are a lot of articles that talk about how critical race theory is at odds with Christianity. But unfortunately, through liberation theology and various things, the political left's ideas are in seminaries. And so they're turning out pastors that are quite progressive, and then they go into churches, and progressive liberal Christianity, a lot of it just totally denies the gospel. It's not the gospel of Jesus Christ, it's a totally different gospel. And I think that when we see it, we need to call it out for what it is and hold them accountable. And if you're in a church and your pastor, and he's trying to be nice and good, and he wants to be liked, and he's totally off base because he's talking about stuff he doesn't know about, we have to kind of have a meeting with him and try to explain to him exactly what he's dealing with, because in a lot of cases they don't know what they're dealing with.
I have another question real quick. Do you think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris put the United States at risk at falling for the great reset that the World Economic Forum is pushing?
What now?
Do you think that, are you familiar with the World Economic Forum's great reset ideology? Do you think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris put the United States at risk at just going full board, hopping on that train and just moving, having the United States be a big part of that?
Everything they do puts America at risk. It started when there's no election.
All right.
There's no way that you can deny that they did. And I mean, all of us, and most of us were watching the TV that night, and I can tell you, people ask me, how's Donald Trump going to do? And I have a great track record. I said, he's going to win by a landslide. And so I'm watching, and the numbers are rolling in, and then all of a sudden they said, oh, a pipe has broken in Georgia. My stomach sank, because I knew that when they're going to stop counting. And then the next thing, within an hour, maybe 30 minutes, then all these other places were going to shut down. We're going to shut down for the night. That had never happened before. And so I knew at that point that this was bad news, that something was up. And then the fact that we're not allowed to talk about what took place, and I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Why couldn't we talk about what took place? And then I think with the Supreme Court and the various courts that, for one thing, look, they're not nice like us. And so if you're afraid and you're usually intimidated, you're not going to vote against them. So I think a lot of judges and people in authority were afraid to stand up. And so fear holds people back. But I do think the election was stolen in various ways, and especially in those urban areas where they have long records of cheating. And Nashville is one of them, but we're a red state, so it doesn't matter. You can cheat and win Nashville and won't affect anything because of the rest of the state. But I think that what the political left does is it uses racial and ethnic minorities to advance its own goals, and it doesn't actually care about the people. Because if they cared about Black people, you wouldn't have so many abortion clinics located in Black communities. You wouldn't have had the leaders saying it's okay, COVID is just terrible, it's killing all these racial and ethnic minorities, but it's okay for you to go to a protest. So you can have 10,000 people protesting because racism is much worse than COVID. And so they actually encourage people to go out and protest. And whenever it serves and defund the police. Okay, defund the police. Well, if police, then more racial and ethnic minorities will die. And the survey showed that racial and ethnic minorities did not want the police defunded. Those were progressives that wanted to defund the police. Progressives have always pushed abortion and sterilization of people they considered undesirable. And COVID, I mean, I think that COVID is so complicated because I've always felt that there were political interests as well as financial through the pharmaceutical companies. And this big push to force everyone to get vaccines and just how they terrorize people with that John Hopkins map of the COVID cases and deaths and stuff like that. It was manipulation. And now all of a sudden the vaccine is everywhere, anyone can get it. It's free flowing, and I see people rushing out to get it. And we don't know what the long-term consequences are going to be, or how many people are actually having adverse reactions. We hear about some of them, but I can guarantee you that there are more adverse reactions than what they're telling us about. And you think about doing the deaths. If you died, in some cases there was suicide, there were car accidents, there were people that were 99 years old that died, COVID deaths. When people have an adverse reaction to COVID and they were healthy and they got a vaccine, and some people died, they're very slow to report that as vaccine related. So all of this stuff is complicated, and there are political agendas. If you think about the vaccine manufacturers, they have been granted immunity so that you can't sue them. And you think about big tech and just how the protections that Congress voted them. All of those things are things that need to be changed, they're unacceptable, and they wouldn't happen. They would not happen if the Republicans and the Democrats had not worked together. And so a lot of things, it's not Democrat versus Republican, it's the establishment and the elites, and it takes people from both parties that are pushing these things. And for those of you all who really want to change society, I think what you have to do is realize that if you want to run for office and you think you're going to be different, you're not going to be different if you're going to be someone you think you're going to go to Congress and you're going to stay. I think you have to be willing to go there and just stay one term and do what you have to do, even if it costs you your seat, because that's what a statesman will do. And then we need people who want to serve as statesmen, who are willing to go and lose and to fight the battle. And that's the only way we change things. Bringing them into the Republican Party. When you think about, I think I saw some data where something like 26% of black males that have a high school education voted for him, and 22% of those with college degrees, black men. And only 80% of black men voted for Democrats. Whereas, black women more than do support the Democratic Party. There are lots of reasons for that. But a lot of young people blacks that switched over because of Donald Trump, they've not switched back. If you look at Brexit, and he changed the party, but also he was coming after critical race theory. One of the things that I've done is I have incorporated a new business called Unity Training Solutions, and it was birthed last summer during the riots and stuff, when I saw how race was being used and how the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry was using, George Floyd and all of this stuff to push the radical agenda, and just all the money they were getting. It just came to me, no, unity was what we needed. And we needed to have an option for companies where they could, if they want to bring in people that teach about the history of the country, or by, I would say, what we have been able to accomplish working together, it had to be in harmony with traditional American values and principles and our civil rights laws and our Constitution. And so I gave a presentation really stressing in Washington the need for us to have an alternative to the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry, and discuss the critical race theory and how destructive it was, president signed an executive order ending diversity training in, federal agencies, he was on the right track because it is racism. It does run counter to our civil rights laws, and I think counter to the Constitution. And, Joe Biden, they totally reversed all of that, and then just pushing like it's the critical race theory and the racism on steroids. When you think about it, what good can come from it? I don't think that good can come from it, because I think there are a lot of people that really didn't think it along racial lines, that they didn't, everything wasn't about race, they didn't hate anybody, they just wanted to go about their business. When they put so much focus on race, and now what they want to do is to teach children about racial differences. Even have parents, expose their kids to all different kinds of faces so that they will favor the white faces over black, brown, or yellow faces. All of this stuff is to accentuate race to make sure that kids, when they're playing around, they're playing and they have their friendships, they're really not noticing race. They want them to notice race. And it can backfire. Whatever they try to do with the social engineer is likely to backfire. And this kind can backfire very easily. Suppose you're a little black kid, and so you're living along with little white kids about racial groups and how they're different. Suppose you notice that it's the white kids that are beating me up. Or if you're white and you notice that the brown kids are beating me up, aren't you teaching kids how to be racist? Because you already taught them that there were group differences. You're teaching them to see people along racial lines, not as Billy is beating me up. They're teaching kids to see things based on that group, based on group racial differences. So when things go badly, it's more likely that you're going to be creating more racists in the sense that people are going to be responding. Like if the brown kids are beating me up, I'm going to be scared of all brown kids, not just the ones beating me up. Or if the white kids are beating me up and they're calling me names and I'm a person of color, I'm going to be afraid of all white kids. I think that's what's going to happen. And that it's very foolish to bring race into everything. And I'm an individualist, and I believe that as Americans, that we should have the right to be individuals. And if I had heard the things that we teach young people today, I don't think I would make the same success story. I always believe that hard work made a difference. I believed in the American dream, and I was able to be successful because I did not see myself handicapped because I'm black, I'm female, I'm poor. I mean, all these things that I could have used as an excuse. And I tell the story that was in graduate school when I started studying theories of oppression that I learned that I was not supposed to accomplish any of the things that I had already accomplished. My sociology class taught me that if I was a child of an alcoholic, that by the time I was 40, I would become an alcoholic and I would keep the cycle. And it also teaches you, to come from poverty, you're going to be poor yourself. And I think that if I had believed what they're teaching young people today, I'd still be back in North Virginia in poverty. So one last question.
You mentioned that for public schools for K through 12, it's probably better for parents to send their kids, if possible, to like a charter school or like a private school. What are your thoughts on like colleges, since they seem to be even more biased towards progressivism?
They all are. And I know the parents just say, oh, I'm sending my child, to a Christian school. I'm sending them, in Nashville, we have Rebecca. Belmont used to be a Baptist school. They're very secular now. Lipscomb Church of Christ, very secular. There are no really safe places except maybe Hillsdale. There may be some other schools, but we know that Hillsdale has sort of distinguished itself. And I think that conservatives can go to any of the campuses and make it, but you have to know who you are before you get there. You have to have a plan, you have to have a strategy, and then when you get there, you form your support group. And the young people that are part of the Young Americans Foundation, or the Fairless Food Center, or Black Center, or Turning Point, you are forming relationships with other conservatives all across the country. So when you go to college, you're less likely to be get on campus, you really need to connect with other people of faith. And you need to realize that orientation, it's meant to just tear you down. It's meant to destroy you. It's meant to strip you of the values and principles that you learned at home because institutions have their own values. And they're taught openly about their values. And so what they're trying to do is instill their values in you. So when you graduate, you become a Harvard man or a Yale man or Vanderbilt, lady or whatever, you're carrying their values. And I think one reason we've been disappointed by so many Supreme Court justices, no matter how conservative they say they are, they went to Yale, they went to Harvard, they went to one of those elite schools, and they were indoctrinated by the process. I think that Solomonsky's rules for radical, where he talks about infiltration, manipulation, and deception as strategies for gaining power and shifting power from the haves to the have-nots, that conservatives would benefit from reading it. And as a Christian, I don't encourage you to engage in deception, but I don't have a problem with infiltration. And I don't have a problem with subterfuge. Like the Bible had plenty of characters that engaged in subterfuge. And I think that we need a critical mass of people, and we need people in just every sphere and every institution, which means that everyone can't be out front. And so those conservatives that may watch this video, but they are in that room, they don't want anyone to see them hanging out with y'all, we need them. And we need them because they may be the ones that can go to college, they still have conservative values, they don't keep their mouths shut, they don't go along with the system, but they're still conservative. We need people that are strategic, and when they get position, they hire people like themselves. Ideally, they would hire people like themselves. They would do like the political left, and they would exert their power. And so I think that when you go to college, you need to have a strategy about what you go. You all went into college, and maybe you're still talking high school students. For those of you that may go to graduate school or professional school, you have to be strategic. And some of the things the political left does to try to harm people, like when I was teaching at Vanderbilt, some of the Christian students that wanted to go to medical school, you have to do that interview. And they may ask you questions to try to figure out what your position is on abortion or LGBT issues. I think that you have to, that I can tell you how to answer the question. And I think that you just have to be wise. You're innocent as a dove, as wise as a serpent, when you're dealing with people that you know are trying to trap you up. But it's very important for us to be positioned. It's important for us to be everywhere. It's important for you to know who you are and what your values are. And one reason we get disappointed again and again and again by Republicans in Congress is because a lot of those people don't seem to have core values. If you have core values, you don't have to guess about what to do. You just apply your values. One last question. Yes.
I don't think it honored yesterday saying that more families have school. And I just wondering that we plan for agenda in the future.
I mean, the left believes that ends justify means, and nothing they say can be trusted or taken at face value. Everyone is expendable, and so you would go crazy trying to read meaning and significance in anything they say because they only gonna say what's convenient for the time. And so hopefully, as conservatives, we would stay principled. But again, I think it's important for us to be everywhere, to infiltrate organizations, to get information. There's some of us that have to be on fact-finding, intelligence gathering missions, reporting those conversations, leaking them to people that can make a difference. And that's how we change things. And I'm a person of faith, and I believe that God has called me to do what I do. And when I had my Christian conversion experience, God lifted off a fear that had held me back for years. In fact, even when I was a faculty member, I used to try to write out everything. And for me, God impressed on my mind that He had given me a message bigger than me. And as I focused on the message, it took the attention off of me because when you're shy, you're afraid you'll make a mistake and that people are gonna laugh at you and all these things. It's all about you. But if you have a message, and you have a mission, and you have a calling, it's not all about you, it's about what you do for other people. Thank you so much